You're listening to Truth to Power Live with Dumisani Washington. Yes, it is Truth to Power Live with Dumisani Washington. I am your host, Dumisani Washington. Great to be with you on this Sunday, July 28, 2024, broadcasting out of New York City on the WNEW HD3 FM 102.7. How you doing, New York? Also streaming on different platforms, Rumble, on X, on YouTube, I believe on LinkedIn, and finally, we are loaded up if you are listening to this on Podbean or any of the podcasts, because we access Podbean. Welcome as well. So you may be listening to it live. You may be checking it out on a podcast, wherever and whenever you're listening to this. Welcome, welcome. Great to have you here. Episode 7 of Truth to Power Live with Dumisani Washington. Again, shout out to the supporters and people at the station. As we got started here, 7 episodes already. Well, it's not in the can just yet, but 7 episodes getting started here. So much to discuss on our show. If you haven't listened to it already, if you don't already know, we're still brand new. We discuss the Bible, music, politics, culture, the Black American community, current events, geopolitics, Israel, Africa, marriage, family, education, and everything in between. Again, another shout out to my baby who was with me on last week. If you haven't checked it out already, my wife of 36 years, mother of our 6 children, grandmother to our 3 grandsons, an amazing, amazing woman. We actually talked about parenting on last week. You can check out episode 6. Everything should be on those different platforms and everything. So again, shout out to her. She will be back. We'll discuss some more. We did one segment together, but we have so much more to do. It was a chance for us to kind of introduce that the discussion that we have as pastors and ministers over the years. One of the things, as I said before, that's been on our hearts so much is families, right? Mothers, fathers, husbands, wives, raising children in what is an increasingly tumultuous time. In the 36 years that we've been married, we could not imagine raising children. Now, not that it's completely commendable, and we are encouraging these young couples to do just that. But when I say couldn't imagine, the challenges that are faced now by these young families, all the different very negative forces coming at our children. And I mean our children just in terms of Black. I'm talking about just children. American children are bombarded with all kinds of things that they should never even have to be dealing with as kids. But again, that's not on today. Today, we're going to have to deal with a few things. So this is election season. The most consequential, volatile, all of those things. And of course, as you just heard, one of the things that we cover or we discuss here is politics. And I want to delve into a couple of things. Kamala Harris is the heir apparent on the Democratic side for running for president against Donald Trump on the Republican side. And it's interesting, among other things, the convention. I'm not sure when the Democratic convention is. I think it's coming up pretty soon. So it's not official. She's been endorsed by the Obamas, apparently endorsed by President Biden, who, as you probably already know, stepped down. There's still a lot of questions around that, controversies around that. We've already had an assassination attempt on one of the candidates, which would be Donald Trump, a couple of weeks ago, 2-3 weeks ago. And I said then that for those who are the haters of Donald Trump, who couldn't care less or even want him to die, one of the many ways that they are short-sighted is that type of atmosphere, once that bloodlust is released in that sense, it's not going to be partisan. Everyone's life in political life became more endangered. I mentioned before how RFK Jr., Robert Kennedy Jr., whose father was assassinated, whose uncle was assassinated, he doesn't even have Secret Service protection, or he may have it now. This is after the attempt on Trump's life. There's still all kinds of controversy about that. I saw one of the videos that came out recently about the fact that the Secret Service that was stationed there at Trump's rally in Pennsylvania, they had a complete unobscured view of the shooter and could have taken him out at any moment. Why he was allowed to be up there on the roof with a gun, it was pretty obvious that he had ill intentions. And so there's hearings going on. Christopher Wray, I believe the FBI director, was asked about it on Capitol Hill, and he made some sort of statement about, it might have been shrapnel, it may not have been a bullet. So there's all kinds of games being played, unfortunately. And ladies and gentlemen, as the American people, we are the losers. I don't care which side of the aisle that you are on. Once it's open season on our political leaders, once our institutions can't be trusted in terms of just objectivity, right? So you're having a lot of calls, some on both sides of the aisle, for more clarity, I should say. It's happening on both sides of the aisle, more clarity about what's going on with that, in terms of that assassination attempt. And then, of course, a lot of the rallying around Kamala Harris. There's all kinds of controversy there, too. What I want to do, and we'll see how we can kind of get into this on this week, and I won't be able to take calls or direct questions. I mean, definitely leave your comments there. I want to check them out. Our producer is checking them out as well. I do want to share a couple of things, and I think I have it. We have it. Do we have it? Yeah, loaded up. A couple of things in particular. So the part of the issue that we're gonna, because of on our show, and among other things, as you may not know, I am also the founder and the CEO of what's called the Institute for Black Solidarity with Israel. You can go to ibsi.org. You can find out more about that organization, ibsi.org. Of course, I forgot to say ttplive.com. You can go to ttplive.com. You can be streaming this from there, or you can find out more about this particular show. This is not connected. This is not an Institute for Black Solidarity with Israel venture. It's just this one of the hats that I wear, and some of my comments will come along those lines. There was, what was interesting to me as a lot of this information where Kamala Harris is concerned, her being the, I should say, presumptive nominee. There was immediately what we also noticed, particularly in the wake of Bibi Netanyahu's, the Prime Minister of Israel. He addressed the joint session of Congress, such as it was. It was mostly Republican. A few of the Democrats were there as well. We actually also, there was a comment that Kamala Harris made maybe the day after. And she made a speech similar to Joe Biden's speech after October 7th, in which he encouraged Israel, verbally stood with Israel, but then also made some concerning remarks that foreshadowed where we were going. And this is one of the unfortunate realities politically when we're talking about Israel. We're talking about the two parties, but particularly right now for this moment, the Democrat Party. I'll deal with some of the right-leaning stuff in a moment. And there was a comment that Kamala Harris made, and we're going to load it up for you and play it. I'm going to comment on that. This is a little clip, maybe a little less than a minute clip. I'm going to let you hear it, let you check it out. You can listen to it, obviously, on the radio. You might have the video part of it you can see as well here. The producers are helping me out. And I want you to listen to the last, about a minute clip of this, because even though Kamala Harris starts off by saying that October the 7th was heinous and Hamas was completely wrong and Israel has a right to defend itself, all the, talking points, which are all correct, she also says this. If we can load this up for you. Let's go here.
My serious concern about the scale of human suffering in Gaza, including the death of far too many innocent civilians. And I made clear my serious concern about the dire humanitarian situation there, with over 2 million people facing high levels of food insecurity, and 500,000 people facing catastrophic levels of acute food insecurity. What has happened in Gaza over the past 9 months is devastating. The images of dead children and desperate, hungry people fleeing for safety, sometimes displaced for the second, third, or fourth time. We cannot look away in the face of these tragedies. We cannot allow ourselves to become numb to the suffering, and I will not be silent.
Now, that was about about a minute clip. Now, again, there's a broader, you can listen to the whole video or watch her whole speech. I think it was about 8-9 minutes. I don't remember exactly, but you check it out. You're welcome to. I'm kidding. The very last thing that she just said in this little clip was that I will not be silent. I will not be silent. I am going to speak out on the behalf of the suffering of the Palestinian people. And the way that she's actually phrasing this whole thing is totally in the context of what Israel is doing to the Palestinians in Gaza. Ladies and gentlemen, these are Hamas talking points. You cannot say Israel has a right to defend itself. Hamas was wrong in what it did in slaughtering Israelis, and at the same time turn and pivot and say, but by the way, Israel is causing suffering in Gaza. First of all, there are not 2 million Gazans with food insecurity. Again, these are all Hamas talking points. Israel has ensured that tons of food each week have continued to go into Gaza to make sure, not only just the food, but also making sure that innocent Gazan civilians, non-combatants are not harmed. They have the best ratio right now when it comes to combatants to civilians harmed or killed, which is about 1-to-1, sometimes even less than that. It's funny, Benjamin Netanyahu addressed this very issue in his speech to Congress. Kamala Harris is saying, which is pretty much the Democrat talking point, that Israel is either wantonly killing Palestinians, including women and children, right, which is not true. Israel is starving Palestinian people, which is also not true. And for those who don't have access to the food that's actually coming in, that is completely Hamas. Hamas hoards the food. Hamas takes the food. It also even sells the food to the people at high and marked up prices. We have all of these receipts, ladies and gentlemen. And when you make a speech like that, particularly now as the next head of state, sounding just like Joe Biden, sounding reminiscent of Barack Obama, who actually equivocated Hamas and the IDF, talking about, what Hamas did was bad. But Palestinians, basically, they have a right to be upset, is basically what he's saying. Ladies and gentlemen, this is very dangerous speech. And not only does it even make their war effort in attempting to eradicate Hamas more difficult, it puts the lives of both Jewish people and pro-Israel people, who are those who are just want peace in the United States, in danger as these protests keep erupting more and more violent. And we'll say some more about that. Got to take this break, and we'll be right back with more Truth to Power Live after this.
Hey, baseball fans, looking for unique and inspiring experience? Visit the Yogi Berra Museum and Learning Center in Little Falls, New Jersey. Dive into the legacy of one of baseball's greatest legends, Yogi Berra. Explore his 10 World Series championships, personal memorabilia, and countless inspiring stories. Discover interactive exhibits, educational programs, and special events for all fans of all ages. Perfect for families, school trips, and anyone who loves the game. Come celebrate the life and career of Yogi Berra at the Yogi Berra Museum. For more info and tickets, visit yogiberramuseum.org. Don't miss out on this grand slam of an experience.
Hey, New York. The New York City Basketball Hall of Fame is making a comeback. Follow all the action at hoopshallny.org or on Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, and Instagram. Just search for Hoops Hall NY. That's hoopshallny.org. See you there.
Are you ready to take charge of your health and well-being? UK Health Radio is your ultimate digital destination for cutting-edge health information and inspiration. At UK Health Radio, we know that good health is not merely the absence of disease, but a state of complete physical, mental, and emotional well-being. Tune in to our wide range of expert-led shows where renowned health professionals share about the latest research, practical tips, and inspiring stories that will motivate you to live your healthiest life. Don't settle for anything less than vibrant health. Tune in to ukhealthradio.com, the world's #1 talk health radio and podcast platform.
You're listening to Truth to Power Live with Dumisani Washington.
Go to ttplive.com. That's ttplive.com, Truth to Power Live. WNEW.com. The last clip that we played in the first segment of some of Kamala Harris's comments regarding the Israel-Gaza war. And again, we were pointing out how distorted it is and how dangerous it is, because again, you are equivocating between Israel and the IDF. You are blaming Israel for the suffering in Gaza, where the suffering in Gaza is Hamas, that not only attacked the Israelis, continues to attack the Israelis. And Hamas, which remember, is but one of many proxies of the Islamic Republic of Iran. So Hamas in Gaza, Hezbollah in Lebanon, where there's also fighting going on. There's an all-out war that may be breaking out any moment with all that's going on there. Islamic Jihad, and so on and so forth. So Iran has Israel surrounded, its proxies, not to mention the state of Iran itself, firing, so again, some 300 missiles and drones at Israel back in April. So it's as if these things are often ignored by our lawmakers, particularly on the left side of the aisle, and they just go on with the talking points that seems to be given to them, and it's making it more and more dangerous. I want to play another clip for you, if we can, Mr. or Miss Producer, if you can have that loaded up for me. I believe this is one you're going to hear just for a few seconds. This is, I don't know, and we actually got this from a clip on a website, on an X post. Shelly G is what this is. She actually posted a clip, and this is of Kamala Harris at the Islamic Center of Southern California. And this may have been about a year or two ago. Maybe, I'm not sure exactly the date, but I want you to listen to what she says. Now combine this was obviously before October 7th, combine this with the whole, like I said, the Hamas talking points, and this is what she's saying about Islamophobia to the group there at the Islamic Center in Southern California. Let's go ahead and roll that too.
We must have the courage to object when they use that term, radical Islamic terrorism, which ignores how Muslims have overwhelmingly been the greatest victims of terror.
If you didn't hear that part, we must reject the term radical Islamic terrorism, which she then, as they're clapping, you may not have heard that part. She says, which ignores how Muslims are the greatest victims of terror. Now let's touch on this one, and I'll do another one in a moment too. First of all, and we're going to touch on the whole, again, Islamophobia. It is true that the greatest victims of Islamic terrorism are actually Muslims, particularly in Africa and the Middle East. This is only because there's the intentional slaughtering of Christians into the thousands every year by Islamists, by radical Islamic terrorists. And they are also killing if there are Jews and other what we call religious minorities in the area, or even not a religious minority. You're talking about in Nigeria, the majority of faith is actually Christian, but there is as Islamists spread throughout the country, different parts of the country, that are killing Christians again by the thousands. Right? So saying something as unwise as rejecting the term radical Islamic terrorism, when that is not only a thing, but it is a thing that is slaughtering Christians, certain Jews in the area, and other Muslims. There are Muslims who are dying at the hands of Islamic terrorists, and not making that distinction, because she even goes on and says something about rejecting the term of illegal alien. There are illegal immigrants, people who are in the country illegally, which are not to be confused with people who are legal immigrants. That's just a thing. Language is real, and because of the obfuscation of language, like what is a woman, that kind of stuff, this is one of the reasons why we're here now in the midst of the confusion, because clear speech is not something that is regularly heard. And so actually addressing real issues in real time becomes a perilous thing for someone, particularly politically. Okay, so again, we're looking at who is likely to be the presidential nominee on the Democratic side. I want to play you one more. I don't usually do this. This is not again, we talk about different topics and everything on our show, Truth to Power Live. Again, ttplive.com. But I want to play you one other one because we're talking about the whole not dealing with Islamic terrorism. And then this fake issue of Islamophobia. Are there people who hate Muslims? Yes. Are there people who would want to threaten Muslims? Absolutely. I mean, any religious faith, Christians, right, which is the number one persecuted religion, right? Jews, Muslims, absolutely. But to inject the issue of Islamophobia, especially in the midst of the fast rising attack of Jews throughout the Western world by people with a radical Islamic mindset, not to mention, again, the slaughtering and enslavement and displacement into the millions of Christians and other religious minorities throughout Africa, people like places like Sudan, places like Boko Haram in Nigeria. We've talked about it a great deal. This is one of the reasons why the African Jewish Alliance was formed, AfricanJewishAlliance.org. You may have heard me talk about it before. IBSI is a proud member. The Institute for Black Solidarity with Israel, for whom I serve as a CEO and founder, is the proud member of the African Jewish Alliance. And one of the reasons why it exists is because you have Africans and Jews coming together, recognizing that Hamas is Boko Haram, is Hezbollah, Islamic Jihad, is ISIS. It's all the same mentality, and not calling it out is one of the reasons why we are suffering such a scourge of Islamic terrorism throughout the Western world, and obviously in Africa and the Middle East. Again, it is a tool that's used for people who are not that bright, who are not going to really actually think and have real conversations. I want you to hear this clip, because this is all connected. I want you to hear this clip here, and I'm coming to this California thing in a second, but this is the guy who's Jake Tapper. I'm sorry, Jake Tapper from CNN is interviewing Mitch Landrieu. I hope I'm saying his name correctly, who is a top Biden advisor, and he asks him, Tapper asked Landrieu, I think it's Landrieu, about the protest. He's talking about the college campuses, but far beyond this, because this clip is actually from May 2024, a few months ago. So, producer, let's go ahead and let's let them check this one out here, please.
Politico has a story out this morning noting that a lot of the multimillionaires and billionaires funding the most explicitly anti-Israel groups, ones that think Israel has no right to exist, that are active on campuses, that these groups are funded by big Biden donors, the Pritzkers, the Gateses, George Soros, David Rockefeller Jr. Should they stop funding these groups? Are they causing unrest for the American people?
Well, let me say this. I think that everybody, as the president has said, needs to kind of get focused in on the very core principles of what our Constitution allows and what our Constitution protects. And that is this. Everybody has a right to protest, but they have to protest peacefully. If they're protesting violently, that has to end. There's no place for that. There's no place for anti-Semitism. There's no place for Islamophobia.
I want you to listen and watch the verbal, psychological sleight of hand. Jake Tapper actually references, again, we were a little surprised when we saw that ourselves. You have the mainstream left-leaning media acknowledging that these violent protests, among others, because we also know that Iran is helping fund those protests. We know that Qatar pumps billions of dollars into our school systems, and they're actually into our education systems, particularly the college campuses, and they're involved in this as well. But what Jake Tapper does, he's actually citing other news sources, including Politico, that lets us know that the other foundations and families and people like the Pritzkers, I believe in Illinois, the Gates Foundation, Bill Gates, George Soros, David Rockefeller, are all who are top Biden donors, and with Biden virtually out, Biden-Harris donors, because there's no reason to believe that these donors who have been backing Biden are not going to back now the heir apparent Kamala Harris. Kamala Harris's donors, however, therefore, Pritzkers, Gates, Soros, Rockefeller, and others, are funding the violent anti-Semitic protests on the streets. He says in the campuses, but again, these protests have spilled out from the campuses onto the streets long ago. The Biden advisor responds by not responding. He does two-tier, he does a little dance, right? First thing he says is that everybody has a right to protest. Okay, can you back up a little bit? Let's deal with the fact that these protests are being funded by the top donors of the regime in charge. In other words, It is the Biden-Harris regime. It is the Biden-Harris party. It is the Biden-Harris administration that is actually helping fuel the anti-Israel, anti-Semitic, anti-America, because yes, you see American flags being just the other day after Bibi's last week after his speech or during his speech, all the protests out there, kids were being bussed in from all over the place. They are taking down flags at certain different Washington D.C. monuments, and they're defacing the monuments, taking down American flags, burning those flags, and hoisting Palestinian flags, things that are actually illegal, ladies and gentlemen. You don't see any legal. This is one of the reasons why you don't see these protests being shut down by law enforcement. And, oh, by the way, some of those who did get ceremonially arrested were released later on that day. There are videos out there of them celebrating and everything. So if your donors, Kamala Harris, if your donors, Joe Biden, if your donors to your party, Barack Obama, and the rest of the DNC, are the ones who are paying for the protests, you then are promoting the protests, which would explain again why these protests they can go on and on and on. We talked about it in before, how some of these protesters have gone into churches. They're going to synagogues and Jewish neighborhoods. This is nothing new. During the George Floyd, again, Summer of Love, they're out there. Other organization, Institute for Black Solidarity with Israel, again, manipulating the whole thing about black voices, trying to act like black folks are down with all this Jew hatred by having Black Lives Matter go into Jewish neighborhoods after the death of George Floyd as if the Jews did it. That's exactly what they were sending. Oh, Israel trains police officers in the United States. Therefore, Israel's not responsible for any of these things going on. Not to mention the fact that even if you thought that the Israeli police helping train police all over the world was some sort of how responsible for Mike Brown or George Floyd or anybody else, why are you going to yeshivas and synagogues in places like the Fairfax area of LA or different parts of Boston, different parts of New York? Why are you terrorizing Jews in the name of black people? Y'all are not down for anything that's going on in our community. You are funded by folks who are trying to destroy our nation. None of that gets addressed. Biden's advisor doesn't address that at all. He turns after he pivots about the whole everybody has the right to protest and just shouldn't be violent, but they are violent. He's not addressing that at all. And then he says Islamophobia. See where I'm going? How did we get from CNN, Jake Tapper, asking you about the Biden administration's donors, the Harris administration's donors, funding these violent protests to Islamophobia? This is the game that's been played ever since 9/11, particularly. These are concerning issues that are being addressed, and they're talked about it out there in social media and everything. A lot of the media that is left-leaning is going to try to cover for these things and act like they don't really exist, and it's going to be up to people of good conscience and goodwill, citizen journalists and other independent minds, to actually bring these issues to the forefront. I want to connect this to what is probably going to be a broader thing here, because this is not just about the election itself or about Kamala Harris and facing off with Donald Trump, even though that's not actually official, like they have to do the whole party thing, I guess. And so we're going to see what happens with that in the coming days. Again, I still don't remember when the actual Democrat convention is. I should know that. I don't have it on my calendar right here. I'll pull it up a little later. I did I ever say, if you're looking at this, the different background, I didn't say this in the very beginning. I'm on the road. You're looking at this. Those of you who've seen, if you're on the radio, you don't see anything differently, of course. But if you're watching this and you've seen some of the other broadcasts, we are actually in Atlanta, Georgia. Had this amazing conference at Pastor Matrilla Hall. Shout out to Pastor Hall at Faith to Grace Ministries, United for Survival. We are working with pastors across the country as we are talking about this issue of Israel and the Jewish people, particularly as it intersects with the black community and the black church. So yes, I'm in Atlanta, Georgia. ttplive.com. Go to ttplive.com, where we like halfway into the program and I say something about why I'm actually being on the road. Forgot about that. My bad. I want to deal with something else here. Kamala Harris is out of California, right? She was the district attorney, I believe, in San Francisco for a number of years. She served as the attorney general for the state of California, and then went on, of course, to become a senator, and is now just a few months away, possibly, of becoming the first both female and not even African American. She's mostly Indian, but still, first woman of president of the United States. It could happen. Some people, never happened. Well, that's why they have the election, as free and fair as it can possibly be. And there are people within the party, the Democratic Party, still crying foul. I mean, the Marxists, Black Lives Matter, they're making lots of noise out there in social media about the fact that this was not a process that was actually done. She was just kind of anointed and chosen, and so they're talking about, hey, there needs to be a vote, and all that stuff's going on. But in the context of the whole Israel thing, if you're not from California, you're not in this space politically. Now I'm talking about this space, Israel-Palestinian conflict. California is arguably the leading entity in the United States when it comes to anti-Israel disinformation on a systemic level. I'm talking about both in high school, somewhat in junior high as well. It's going all the way down to the grade schools, and college. From the critical ethnic studies, which was signed into law back in 2020 by the governor, to the anti-Zionist institutions that actually exist, the faculty. Melina Abdullah is the head of Black Lives Matter Los Angeles, and she's also a professor within the UC system of, I believe, of ethnic studies, maybe of African studies. I'm not sure exactly which. And she was the one who announced and led the pogrom into the Jewish community back in the summer of 2020 or May of 2020, after the George Floyd protests and a lot of uprisings. And to our knowledge, has never been questioned. They were chanting death to the Jews and all of this is terrorism, ladies and gentlemen. She's helping lead a terrorist movement, particularly against the Jewish people. Ami Horowitz did a video several years ago about Black Lives Matter, interviewed her, Melina Abdullah, who also inferred that, that the killing of cops was okay, right? It was just kind of like a wink and a nod. So this is serious stuff. California is the hotbed of this mindset. It's the hotbed of this ideology. And this is important to know on many different levels. Kamala Harris, who could very well become the first woman president of the United States, and then the first president of the United States out of California in 40 years. The last president to come out of California was Ronald Reagan, and I believe the last one before him was Richard Nixon. This is back in the day when California actually had two parties that would actually back and forth and all that. It's pretty much dominated. It still has a Republican Party. They've been pretty much healed and tamed and set to the side. Healed mean like a dog telling heel. For lots of you, there's all kinds of shenanigans that are going on with that. I don't have time to get into that part. But what is important, ladies and gentlemen, is to understand what is happening in California. The type of governance there. I told you about Kamala Harris's history. Gavin Newsom, the current governor, was mayor of San Francisco, I believe, for more than one term. And then after a little space in between, always involved in California politics, was elected to governor several years ago. And the atmosphere there, well, let's do this first. First of all, it went from a budget surplus to a budget deficit, and couldn't get the right number. We were looking for it. Our producers were looking for it exactly. It's somewhere between 60 something and 90 something billion dollars. It may be more than that. That's the budget deficit. The gas prices, everything, the taxes, everything for the regular working class person. If you're wealthy living in California, you're just fine. And if you are poor, you are receiving a certain amount of government assistance, everything. But if you are working, you're not poor and you're working, making a living, but you're definitely not wealthy trying to make it. It is squeezed, which is why you've had thousands of people who've been moving out of the state over the years. But along with that mindset is this oppressive continually, oppressive rulership that, among other things, so exploits the most vulnerable. We're going to come up on our break here, but we need to have both the political and then biblical conversation using this as an example. Among many issues that we could address where California is concerned, and this is relevant because California is now emerging once again as almost like the farm system of the national leaders coming out of the Democratic Party. Either Kamala Harris will officially be the nominee, or it could be a number of other people, including, some are surmising, possibly Gavin Newsom. And if not Gavin Newsom this year, possibly Gavin Newsom in the next 4 years. The machine is already ramping up in that way. But people need to understand, not just Gavin Newsom, a person, not some sort of, dissecting of him, but we're talking about his leadership, Kamala Harris's leadership, the leaders of the state. What has happened to California? My parents moved there in the late 1960s. I moved to San Francisco in 1968. As a baby. I was born in 67, from Little Rock, Arkansas to San Francisco, California. So I'm one of those almost native Californians. My wife was born and raised. We're not living there anymore. We're in North Carolina. Who watched the transformation of a state which was the most prosperous and the one that afforded the greatest opportunity, including for Black families moving out of the South. That is not the California that we have before us today. And I want to talk for a moment around one particular area and also go to the Word of God. So we're going to do this in a second on TTP Live, ttplive.com, truthtopowerlive.com. You can go there, ttplive.com. This is Truth to Power Live. One more break and more after this. Hey, if you are a business or a nonprofit and you want to know about purchasing ad time or underwriting whole or part of an episode of Truth to Power Live with Dumisani Washington, we would love to hear from you. Just email us at info@ttplive.com, info@ttplive.com, Truth to Power Live. And we would love to hear from you, connect with you. Our sales and marketing team has been assembled and they are prepared to offer all types of creative plans for you, whether for your business, again, for your nonprofit, in which we can partner with you and doing this work here together. We, again, love to hear about what you're doing and love to see how we can partner together. info@ttplive.com. Thanks a lot.
You're listening to Truth to Power Live with Dumisani Washington.
Go to ttplive.com for more, ttplive.com. Okay, so this is the last segment here, and we started off on this show talking about the current campaign for presidency. We are focusing in here on Kamala Harris's, her comments around Israel, around not so much the protests, but the war in Gaza. We talked about these very biased comments that she's making. We call them Hamas talking points because we're saying that it is a focus on a fake humanitarian attack by Israel. In other words, as if Israel is attacking Palestinians in Gaza, just innocent men, women, and children. There's this wanton death, and there's no real purpose for them being there, and then the lies about the deaths, the civilian deaths, as well as civilians not receiving food, and all of that stuff is not true. Again, we have all those receipts. And then we talked about the turn and pivot to Islamophobia. We talked about Biden's top advisor. And so then we started talking about the mindset coming out of California. We'll have to do a separate show. As a matter of fact, I'm going to have some guests on, particularly from California, later on when we talk about, and probably during this election season, what has been happening when it comes to education, both college and the primary grades, how these kids are getting all kinds of distorted. Israel's a settler, colonial, oppressor, all of these things. These things are being taught systematically throughout California's grades and schools, universities, and not to mention all the other Marxist disinformation about oppressor narratives and all the equity stuff that Kamala Harris is actually talking about. All of these things that speak to a lack of meritocracy, that speak to everything about the West, the United States, and then by implication, Israel being evil again. And not only not talking about who's really oppressing people in this region, which is the Islamic terrorists, but saying that somehow those things aren't supposed to be discussed. This is a very, very dangerous moment, ladies and gentlemen, because more and more these leaders, these types of leaders, will be coming out of California. I mentioned I want to do one specific thing. If you haven't done it yet, if you don't know already about it, you need to understand that among the other oppressive systems where California is concerned, not the only state, but I'm focusing on here because, again, Kamala Harris, Gavin Newsom, other leaders that may be coming out, you could be looking at the next several presidents, or at least a couple of presidents, possibly coming out of California. And we, as Americans, need to understand that. Do yourself a favor and Google the term homeless industrial complex. And without seeing different clips and everything, because the next thing that our producer is going to show you is a scripture. We're going to go to the word of God. Somebody say amen. The homeless industrial complex is basically a system in which billions of dollars per year from the federal government and from the state government, the state now being California, that billions of dollars that are allocated to the eradication of homelessness or to the relief of homeless, whether it's in shelters, whether it's in drug treatment programs, because what you have a homeless population in California that is hundreds of thousands of people. About 5-6 years ago, it was estimated at around 200,000. It could be much more than that now, again, and not being facetious, but you can't really do a hard census with homeless people because they're homeless. And it seems as though the media, not even seems, for years, has been uninterested in reporting on this. Over the last several years in particular, you wouldn't even know. You'd have to know. Now, again, this is not me bashing California, and nor is it me bashing homeless people. You have to really understand, like the whole Islamophobia, when you're pointing out something real, just when you're Islamophobe. Somehow, if you're dealing with the system of how homeless are exploited, which is where we're going, somehow you're beating up, you're blaming the victim. Listen, there are hundreds of thousands, if not more, we don't know, of homeless throughout California. Some of them are from California. Many of them come from different parts of the country, and they move there, and often for things like weather and the beaches of San Diego and LA and everything, where it could be really nice. It's California, and also for the government instituted programs that give homeless food, alcohol, yes, drugs, yes. It's done in this context. Well, they're going to shoot up, heroin, or they're going to use fentanyl. So we need to give them drug kits so that these things can be clean. And that was the mindset. It started years ago in California. It was always misguided. Why? Well, because if you give an addict more drugs, he or she is going to take more drugs. If you offer them opportunities as an off-ramp for drug treatment, many of them will take it. And that's where much of that money is supposed to be going. But when we're talking about the homeless industrial complex, we didn't get the video ready here, but because this is going to be a little bit later on. But I've mentioned this before in different contexts and said, I don't know if I've done it on the Truth to Power Live show before. But there's a young man out there in Oakland, California. His name is Seneca Scott. He was actually a candidate for mayor a few years ago. He's been a fixture in Oakland politics and community for a while. I believe he does concert promotion, all that kind of stuff. And he become much more of a political person over the last couple of years. The way he saw his community, not just, he's an African-American, but not just his community as a black man, but his community in terms of Oakland manipulated by its leaders. And one of the things that he explained in terms of this homeless industrial complex, we mean billions of dollars that's supposed to go into relieving the suffering of the homeless. It's almost like the PLO. The PLO was set up to the Palestine Liberation Organization and UNRWA, the United Nations Relief Workers Agency for the Palestinian refugees. It was supposed to be giving money to help relieve the suffering or find new homes for Palestinians who have been displaced because of the Arab-Israeli wars. That's not what it is. It's infiltrated with all kind of terrorism. Hamas members of some of the hostages that were found in Gaza were being housed in the homes of UNRWA employees and that type. It's a terrorist organization. What's happening in California is similar. But there are many people who do humanitarian work in California. I know some of them. I'm from California. Pastors and other leaders who are helping with the feeding and clothing of people who are poor, destitute, and many without homes. Unfortunately, there are others who have set up camp in this homeless industrial complex and are just making lots of money. Billions of dollars. Gavin Newsom, the current governor of California, has been vowing to end homelessness for 20 years. We have video of Gavin Newsom that goes back to 2004, mayor of San Francisco, talking about the problem of homelessness, which for all intents and purposes, exploded out of California, particularly during his tenure. He has been talking about ending homelessness for 20 years. As a matter of fact, I remember this during the election season in which Gavin Newsom was elected as the mayor, and I believe that was 2018. He campaigned by saying that he was going to establish a homelessness czar, a separate department within the bureaucracy of California. This department was going to be set up to end homelessness. Now, number one, he'd already been saying it for darn near close to 20 years at that point. Number two, you're talking about six-figure salaries, office buildings, all those things. Again, you're talking about hundreds of thousands of dollars, if not more, just to funding the homelessness czar office that he was talking about. Game, recognized game. That was all game. What do you mean all game? Why? Because you're, first of all, talking about something that you've been saying you're going to eradicate for the past, at that point, a decade and a half, right? Secondly, how salarying a bunch of people and housing them in some very expensive rental buildings in Sacramento is actually going to do the work of solving homelessness, giving people the drug treatments that they need, reuniting them with the families that they need, giving them the psychological help that they need, all of those things. So I mentioned Seneca Scott. Seneca Scott revealed, I didn't know this. I'm from California, and he did a deeper dive. And again, we didn't prepare the video this time, but you'd have to go, maybe next time we will. And he is talking in Oakland, and he's explaining about the homeless industrial complex on another level. He was saying that there are city council members who have started, talking about Oakland, who have started nonprofits and hired people whose sole purpose, they've hired community workers to go to the streets and tell these homeless people who are strung out on drugs, many of them, that you don't have to leave. Just because they're offering drug treatment programs, you don't have to. You have a right to stay out here and do fentanyl. I know I got to watch all the pauses. So I'm making those pauses on the radio, then that's just dead time. I'm still here. My bad. I pause. I get into that preaching mode because so Seneca Scott had revealed for me, people who are watching that, another level of this. Ladies and gentlemen, you are talking about an industry that is built on the backs of broken people. It is a form of slavery. It is a form of human exploitation. These people, again, homeless, talking about mostly whether they're mentally disturbed, whether they're chemically dependent, drugs, alcohol, whatever have you, different things that have led them into these circumstances. And some evil people found out a way to make money off of these people. They are making billions of dollars. And you become disincentivized. Once your soul is that broken and is that bereft, then you are disincentivized to end homelessness, which is what Seneca Scott was referring to. These city council members who start nonprofits and hire these workers to go out there and tell the people to stay on the street. How could you tell someone, don't go to that drug treatment program? You have a right to shoot up heroin. You have a right to sit out here and die on the sidewalk so that you can make money. It's as bad, if not worse, than the slave trade. Slave trade, they bought slaves to do the work for them, right? This one here, the only work that you're doing is dying over on drugs, but I get money for every person out here. So my money starts getting messed with that's what I talk about the terrorists. It's like the terrorists who don't want the Israeli-Palestinian conflict to end, because once it ends and everybody's living in peace and harmony, these checks ain't still being cut from UNRWA, the United States, and other organizations and governments that are flooding you with the billions of dollars, again, which is why Hamas, its 3 top leaders, are worth $11 billion. I believe according to Forbes. This has been reported. According to Forbes several years ago, Hamas is the 2nd or 3rd wealthiest terrorist organization on the planet. Where's that money coming from? They didn't start as tech. They don't own Twitter. That money comes from the taxpayers, you and me, and other people, in particular in the Western world, including Japan and other places, in which that money goes to helping the Palestinians. There's money going into California, both from the state and also from the federal government, to help in homelessness. But homelessness keeps growing. People need to understand the type of machine, the type of bone grinding machine that is the California political system, because those are some of the leaders that may very well be occupying the White House. I'm going to go to the Word of God. You all got that for me, Mr. Producer? Nehemiah chapter 5, 1, and I want to say, put this in context. I often go back to Nehemiah as over the years, the book of Nehemiah and the Word of God is so powerful. The apostle said, sharper than any two-edged sword. It's quickened, it's alive. And Nehemiah, who is part of the Jewish exiles who lived in Persia, but he was a very wealthy, influential man. He served in the court of Artaxerxes, and he's the one who returned the book of Nehemiah. As Ezra and Nehemiah are dual books in the Tanakh, in the Old Testament. And Nehemiah, of course, is the one who's associated with the rebuilding of the wall, the reestablishing of Jerusalem's security. But then also he brought religious reform, and the book is 13 chapters, but in the first few, the rebuilding of the wall is done. The rest of those chapters in Nehemiah is actually dealing with the corruption on the inside. In other words, other Jewish leaders that are exploiting the Jewish poor. Now, this is not about the Jewish people being exploited. I'm using this as an example of leaders exploiting the people they're supposed to be leading, right? And this is... So Nehemiah chapter 5, verse 1, let's read here. I know we're going to run out of time. Now there arose a great outcry of the people and of their wives against their Jewish brothers. Again, this is Nehemiah chapter 5, verse 1. That was verse 1, verse 2. For there were those who said, with our sons and our daughters we are many. Let us get grain that we may eat and keep alive. Verse 3. There were also those who said, we are mortgaging our fields, our vineyards, and our houses to get grain because of the famine. Verse 4, and there were those who said, we have borrowed money for the king's tax on our fields and our vineyards. Verse 5, for our flesh is as the flesh of our brothers, our children are as their children, yet we are forcing our sons and daughters to be slaves, and some of our daughters have already been enslaved, but it is not in our power to help or to redeem them, for other men have our fields and our vineyards. Verse 6, I, meaning Nehemiah, was very angry when I heard their outcry and these words. Verse 7, I took counsel with myself. I began to talk to me. I was so upset. And I brought charges against the nobles and the officials. I said to them, you are exacting interest, tax, or interest on the loans, right, which is against the Torah, each from his brother, and I held a great assembly against them. I think last verse, and said to them, we, as far as we are able, have bought back our Jewish brothers and that have been sold to the nations. And it says here, but you even sell your brothers that they may be sold to us. And they were silent and did not find a word to say. That was the verse 8, Miss Producer. I think I need one more. I want to say this here. Yes, verse 9. So I said, this is Nehemiah still speaking, the thing that you are doing is not good. Ought you not to walk in the fear of our God to prevent the taunts of the nations, our enemies? In verse 9, one more time. Nehemiah tells the people who are exploiting their own people, the thing that you are doing is not good. Ought you not to walk in the fear of God to prevent the taunts of the nations of our enemies? Nehemiah rebukes the leaders of the Jewish people for exploiting the poor. The poor have come to Nehemiah and said, we can't afford to pay the taxes. We can't afford to redeem our children who've been taken into slavery, which again is against the Torah. A Jewish person can't enslave another Jewish person. But what he's actually saying is that our children are enslaved to our debtors. We're enslaved to our debtors because we can't pay our debt. And our lands have been seized. So not only do we have debt to pay off the mortgages, not only can we not pay our bills, they've taken our kids who help us do the work. They've taken our tools. They've seized our property. So we can't even generate the income to pay off our debt. We are saddled with tax burdens and debt, and we can't even work to pay it off because the government has its foot on our necks. And Nehemiah is outraged. He rebukes the leaders, and then he asks them the question, or he makes the statement. He says this later on in Nehemiah as well. He says to them in verse 9, as I was just saying, he said, ought you not to walk in the fear of our God? It's amazing, he makes this correlation. He says what you're doing is wrong, but it's not wrong. You leaders who are oppressing you, you homeless industrial complex thieves who are actually using real people to make money for yourselves. Again, I'm not talking about the folks who are actually in the struggle, trying to help homeless folks, trying to release. I mean, some amazing pastors out there doing all they can do. I'm talking about the folks who know good and well, the leaders of the state, these political leaders who know that billions of dollars have been pumped into this thing now for the last some 20 years, and we're going to end homelessness. As now as it is not ending, it's growing, and there are people who are making gods of money. He says to them, and this is where we're going to end it. All the folks all the church folks say amen. All the folks who believe the book say amen. He says, the danger of what you're doing is not simply the oppression of the people. Not only are you making money, or are you, in this case, in the book of Nehemiah, you are taking land and property from people who are already poor and who cannot afford the burden, the debt burdens that you are laying on them. You are using that as a pretext to take their land and take their property. But he says to them, you're in danger of God's wrath. He said, you should fear God. There's a concept in Deuteronomy, I believe 17, when God tells the children of Israel, you can have a king. When you're ready for a king, or if you want a king, you can have one. But here's the stipulations for it. Here's what your king has to be. And the outline for this king sounds more like a priest. Sounds nothing like, he said, your king should not be like the other nations. The other nations, you should get lots of money. God associates greedy, selfish, manipulative leaders. He tells Israel that's what the heathen do. When Jesus spoke to his disciples, he said, don't lord over each other in terms of your positions. He says, that's what the pagans do. He said, that's what the people who don't have a covenant with God, They treat their people like this. You, as people of God, who are concerned about how God feels, this is the danger of a secularized society. The more a society does not regard God, the more the society becomes both antagonistic to God and the things of God and vicious towards the people. Why? Because the people are made in the image of God. Just like we said before, hatred for God is hatred of Israel. The word of God says that clearly in Psalm 83. Then also a disregard for God is also hatred for people. It is the manipulation of people. I'm over time, I'm sure. Again, like I said before, we have an hour on our show, truthtopowerlive.com. You can go ttplive.com, Truth to Power Live with Dumisani Washington. There's going to be more of this. Again, for those on the podcast part of it, you're going to have a different version of it. We'll have some different things that you can do in your signing up and subscribing to this again. But this is broadcast primarily on the radio on HD3 FM 102.7 in New York City, which is the WNEW. So I've got to wrap it up here. We're going to discuss this, kind of put a pin in this. We're going to go a little bit later on. But again, leaders, God charges the leaders to understand that their positions come from him. All right, this is Truth to Power Live with Dumisani Washington. It's been great to be with you. Thank you so much for joining us. Hope to see you on next week. I guess it's going to be a Sunday in August. Man, July is just about over. But again, great to be with you. You all have a great week. See you next week.
Truth to Power Live with Dumisani.